Welcome back to the LinkedIn clone. In this video we'll be working on image upload on our front-end Angular Ionic application. So let's give a demonstration of what we'll achieve today. So as you can see here, if we click on this profile image and we choose an image and I click open, it updates and it updates everywhere throughout the application. And if I was just to make another cool post and we make that, we can see that the image is preserved for that new post, and also if we edit it, it's also preserved, and we can go ahead and we can delete that. Now it uses RxJS observables throughout the entire application for this to emit to all across our application. However, if we are to enter a document, this isn't a valid MIME type, so it does not make it through the upload. And we also use file type to check for the type. So in the previous video we've checked it on the back end, but I have made this text file and I've just renamed it to a .png, and if I upload that, we won't get that uploaded because the actual type of it was checked with file type, and we'll be using this file type library for that. So let's go ahead and get started. So in the folder structure, in the backend, in the API, I've just added this blank profile images in the images folder. And this is going to be our default. So if the user doesn't have an image, you'll get this photo. Or we'll just need to make some quick tweaks so we can access our photos on the front end. So just on the back end here, in the feed controller, I'm going to add the ability to get the images. So I'm just going to add a GET request here, and we'll route it to the endpoint /feed/image, and then whatever the file name is. And recall that the file name is being converted into with UUID into a unique ID. So it's not the same file name as on the as you upload it. So let's just go ahead and call this find image by name, and we'll chuck in as a parameter here the file name. So this is our file name, it's a string, and we'll also use this res decorator to be able to send our file. So let's get that. And we'll just check that if the file name actually exists. So if the file name exists or doesn't exist, and if we take a look at the back end here, we can see that if a user doesn't have an image, the image path is just going to be null. Now it's got this null in brackets here. So I'm just going to go ahead and check if the string null or the string in brackets null if either of those two are included in the passed in file name, then there's no image to return. So we'll just say return. Otherwise we can return our image. So we can say return res.send file name, and where it is in location in relation to the root directory, it's just in the images folder.
So that's that one.
We'll also want to add some in the user control, because we're going to have the user, which has its image, and also the feed, which are all of the users' images. So in the previous video, we've set up this guard here. So if you go to the image /user/image, you'll go ahead and you'll get back the file of the image. But we could want the file name, because if we get the file name back for the user, then we're able to use this to be able to get it, the file itself, from an open non-guarded directory. So we're going to go ahead and just copy this down, and we're going to call this get image name. So if we find the user image name, and what we would expect back here is an image name, which is a string. So we have our JSON coming back. So we will need to get the ID of the user from the request that's associated with the JSON web token. So what we'll do here is we'll open up the user service, and we can see that we've got update user image by ID and find image name by user ID, and this goes into the user repo and just finds the user by its ID, and we give back the image path. So if we go into our user controller, we can see that we return that method. We pass in the user ID that we found from the request. We use a switch map because we're going to take the image name we're expecting back, and rather than return the sending of the files, what we'll do here is we'll just return the image name. So that's all we really need to do on the back end side of things. So what I'll do now, since we're in our API folder, is I'll just run a npm run start dev, and I'll go ahead and close these so we can concentrate on the front end for the rest of the project. So in our front end, before we start things off, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll just download file type. So we'll do an npm install file type in the LinkedIn folder here, and they'll add it to our node modules and reference it in our package.json file. So now we have that, we can just run an ionic serve. Which opens our application, and if we log in and we press F12, we're now back to our application. Now our images here, these are just hard coded, and what we want to do is have the ability so we can click on this image and this will spread throughout our entire application, including these posts. So in the profile summary component, the start post component, the modal associated with that, the header and the popover component, these are all posts relating to the user. However, these posts here, these could be by anyone. Now it just so happens that all these posts are by this user, but these images will need to be taken from the server separately depending on the author that created them. So the two main parts we're breaking this up to is the authenticated user, and then also the image of the author that posted their post. So let's start off in the Auth Service. So if we open up source, we go into our app and we go into our Auth Service here. We've already set a few things up. So we have access to the user, and we also can get if they're logged in, get the user role, get the user ID. So I'm going to add the ability to get a user stream. So I'm going to create a getter, get user stream. And what this returns, it returns the observable of the user type, because we want to be able to get our user all throughout our application, and in particular the image of the user. But we also want to update the where we have this hard-coded name here in various spots in the application. So we want a one main point where we can tap into that user stream, and then we want to subscribe to it in all of the places. So when it updates, it will propagate throughout our application. And all we need to do for this is just return the already existing user subject. And because it's a behavior subject, we'll need to convert it into an observable so people can subscribe to it. And the reason it isn't a subject in the first place is because we want to actively change it when we do things like if we change the image, we want to actively change the user object in memory and the associated image file, and then they will propagate throughout our application. So this user as observable, nice and simple. We've got our user logged in, user role, user ID. Now I'm going to make another getter to get the full name. So I can get user full name. And of course we could just subscribe to the user stream and do this work elsewhere in the application, but since I've already set up, you know, these other three methods here, and I have that throughout our application, I'm going to go ahead and just continue this sort of way. And plus you only get back what you need as well, so that's also a benefit. So what I would expect back for the full name is just a string. So we'll wait for that to occur. So that's going to be an observable, because we're going to return the current user subject as observable. And of course this could be refactored, so you could be subscribing to this user stream directly. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing this approach here. So we know that this is going to return an observable of the user type. So what we want to do is we want to return a different type of observable, i.e. a string. So what we'll do is we'll use the switch map operator. So for the user that we get back of the type user, we'll go ahead and we'll just say the full name. That's going to be equal to the user's first name plus a space plus the user's last name. And then of course we just want to convert that to an observable, so we can wrap it in an of and put in the full name here. And what we want to do is we want to have another get method to get the full path of the image. So I might break this down into two different parts. So we'll have the regular getter to get the full, we'll get the default image, full image path. So this is going to return a string, and it's just going to go and return our blank profile picture on our server. So we can just go ahead and return that. And the reason I'm doing it here is because we're going to use this throughout the application. And if you do need to make a change, you can just make it in the one spot rather than everywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead, and this is on localhost 3000. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this from Postman. And it's in our feed controller when we try and access an image, and we can access it by the name blank profile picture, because that's what I saved it as, and I've already put it into the folder as you seen earlier. So that's the first route. Now I'm going to copy this down so I can have a get full image path, and this will take in a image path or the slug of an image path. I might just say image path or image name. I'll call it image name. Image name, because the name and the path of the slug is going to be the same. And this is going to be a string. So this is sort of like saying we'll have this part here, but this part here is going to be the dynamic part, which is going to be the image name. So we have the ability to get the default image full path if there's no image, and we got the ability to get the full image path if there is an image and an image name passed into that. So that means we can create a get method for our user observable, and we'll call this get user full image path, because we're getting it for the user, not for every post. So this is just going to be a function, and it's going to return a string, and it's either going to return this or this, depending on whether or not there are some, if the user has an image. So basically what we can do here is we can return this, the user observable, pipe into that. We know it's returning a user. Now we want to return the image path, which is a string, so we use the switch map operator. And that takes a user of the type user. Now we want to see if the author has an image. So we'll make a constant variable called const auth has image. And this is going to depend on if the user has an image path or not. I'm just going to go to my user object, and it appears that we do not have the image path added just yet, and that's okay because we can just add it, and we'll just add it below role here as an optional parameter. And I suppose post could be optional as well, so we'll add the two optional parameters at the end of our user model, and we'll close the file up. Now it's not complaining. We put this else operator here in case it's not defined. And if that's returning a string. So if we want to return a boolean, we can use the double exclamation mark. First exclamation mark, we'll see if it's there or not. And the second one will convert the type. So for example, if we have a string here, hello, and then we say not hello. For example, if we had a constant variable here, const x equals hello. If we were to say not x, this would be false, because that implies that there's no x variable set, but there is. So since there is, we'll do a double. So that will return false, and that will return true. And if this was blank, if that was just const x, that means not x would be true, and not x would be false. So it just converts it to a boolean here. And I might change this to does author have image, just to make it the name more of a boolean implied through the name. So basically we want to let the full path be equal to the default path by default. So we can say this dot get default full image path. However, if it meets the check that the user does have an image, that means we can say, okay, we want to let the full image path equal to the get full image path name, and we want to pass in from the user image path, and of course we want to use this here. Now all we have to do is return a new observable, so we can just go ahead and return of the full image path, and that needs to be done in the switch map, and that gets rid of the error for us. We will need to get the image, so we can call some HTTP requests to our server, to the endpoints that we set up earlier in the video. So we have this get default image path, get full image path. These are open on the feed endpoint, or the feed part of the route, in the feed controller I should say. So next we want to have the ability to get the user. So the user, these can't be accessed directly because they relate to the logged in user. So we need to do, say, get user image, and we can go ahead and we can return this dot HTTP dot get, and we can just copy something like this in. And we can just call the endpoint that we defined earlier, the user and the image. And we're going to call this elsewhere. So I'll just want to get one image, so I don't have to unsubscribe if I use the pipe take one approach. And that just gets the user image. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this down, and I'm going to have a method called getUserImageName, and this is going to return an observable with the image name, which is a string. So we can actually go ahead and we can say, we can write that here as well if we want. And if we write it here, then it's implied that it's going to be that, but I just like to put it there anyway. We hit the base API URL, we hit the user controller, and then we hit the image name endpoint. Okay, so we're able to get the user endpoint, get the image and the image name for the logged in user. Next, I want to have the ability to update the user image path. So when we upload a photo, we want to be able to change the URL that's in our database for that associated user for the image path. So we can just say we can update the user image path. And that of course takes an image path of the string. And I might call this image path or image name. Well, ideally you'd want to be consistent with this, but I'm just doing it on the fly. It doesn't really matter, we'll just call it image path. So this is going to return a user. And we can go ahead and we can just return, and this is where we can use our user stream. We can go ahead and pipe into the subject, and we can say we just want to take one, but what we want to do is we want to just go ahead and map the user that we're going to get back, which is of the type user. We get back from our observable stream, and we want to just add this image path. We want to set the image path for the user to the passed in image path that we get. So that way we can change the image path of our user, and then everywhere that subscribes to that subject as observable, so the stream, that will be propagated throughout our application. So to do that, we need to actively call the next method on that, so we can get the next user with the updated image path, and that is exactly what we return. We just return the user. So the final method in this area that we'll need to work with is the actual ability to upload. We're able to get our images and update our images, but we want to also be able to upload our images. So we're going to have this method here called upload user image, and it's going to take some form data. So this is going to come, we're going to implement this on the UI side of things, and for us to make the request, because it's not JSON that we're passing to the backend, we're passing a file, we need to associate the file with a form. So we're just going to have some form data here, and we'll come back to this when we implement it on the UI. So this is just going to take an observable, and it's just going to have a modified file name. That's going to come back to us. And what we can do here is we can just go ahead and return, and we can just copy this post method here. So we're able to copy the post method, but we will be expecting this modified file name to be coming back. We hit the user upload endpoint and we pass in our form data. And these HTTP options relate to JSON. So regular form data does not need a extra parameter here. So that's how you upload or make the API request upload our file. So what I might do here is I might just pipe into this observable here. But when we subscribe to it, before it gets subscribed to, we can just go ahead and tap in, and we can use this object destructuring to get the modified file name here. And what we'll do is when we upload a user image, and only if it's successful, will we update our user. So then the image we update changes throughout our entire application. So we can just say we can let the user, well, we want it to be equal to pretty much the current user objects. The name and all that won't change. So we can actually just go ahead and get the value here of that. But we just want to amend the image path, and that's just going to be amended to the modified file name that we're getting back from our server. So because when we upload our file, it's going to be of the file name is just going to be whatever we called it, and then it gets changed when we upload it onto the server with UUID to a random string, but we need that random string back so we can access that image from the back end and display it on our front end. So we can just set the user image path to that, what we get back from uploading. So we can just go ahead and we can say user, but we want to make that change propagate throughout our application, so we call the next user. Okay. Now we want to actually upload the image from the user's file system, so that file can be attached to this form data so they can send it to the back end. So we're going to start in this profile summary component, and we're just going to add the ability to click here and upload some input. So let's work on that. So we want to open up our profile summary component, and I also want to open up the template. So where we have this image, this is where we want to have our ability to upload something. So what I'm going to do here is, well, a file upload, it needs to have an input. So if I add an input here and I say of the type file, and I just save that, you see that we get this choose file, and then it opens up something here, and if you choose something, it will get it in there like that. However, we want to hide this input, and we want to make the input trigger if we click a different element. So to do that, we can just say, well, firstly we can hide that input. So we can say display none, and we'll need to give this a template variable. So we can just say, okay, this is going to be called file upload, and when there's some sort of change to this file upload, we're going to call a function called onFileSelect, and it takes in the event that's able to detect the file that you upload from your or choose from your file system. So let's just quickly define that on file type, on file select, and we'll just do that. Yeah, oops. So this is going to take an event, and it's not going to return anything. So I'm just going to log out selected. And now I'm going to return back to our template. And now we can add a click event to the iron avatar. And we can just say when you click on this, we want to call the function relating to the input. We want to reference the input element. So since we've gave it a template variable or file upload, we can access that DOM element in our template here. So I can just say file upload, and we can just go ahead and click that. And then when we click that, it's like clicking it directly. So if you just clicked an input field by default, that will open up the file system. One thing we might want to add here though, just for styling, is just to add a pointer here so it just actually looks like it. You can click on it. So I'm going to go ahead and add this cursor of pointer here. And now if we look at this here and we click on the image, and notice that the console doesn't log anything out. It's only after the event has occurred that it logs something out, and then it says selected. If we click cancel, we will also click selected. So this is where we want to implement some logic here and only allow the correct types to come in, and also check that they are the correct types. So we can go to our profile summary component, and we can pretty much close this file now. So on the file select, what we're going to get is we want the file. So we can say we're going to have a file here, and it's going to be of the type file. Now this is coming from the event target, but we want to give it some type, so we get some IntelliSense and type safety, and this is just the HTML input element. Now the target, you can have multiple files, but we're just selecting one file. So we can just go ahead and access the files in the first position, or the 0 index in the array. And of course, if there is no file selected, if you cancel or something like that, there's no real need to do anything here, so we can just return. Now, we will need to send some form data through, so we need to define our types. So let's go ahead and define our types here. So right at the top of our class, we can say we're going to have a form, which is of the form group, and you can bring that in. And then on the ng on init, this is where we can say this form is equal to new form group, and we just want to have a field for the file, and that's going to be of the new form control, and we'll just pass in null on the ng on init, and we can just save that. And another thing we're going to want to add here is some types, because there's going to be certain types that we allow. You could put this into another file, but since it's only going to be referenced here for now, and I know the scope of this application, I'm just going to define it up the top here. So there's only so much refactoring I want to be doing for this clone. I don't want to turn it into an enterprise application that I'm building everything out as I would in my professional career or anything like that. But if I just make a type for the valid file extensions, so I'm going to have the PNGs, the JPEGs, and also the other type of JPEGs in here. So I'm going to duplicate that line down, and I'm just going to have a valid MIME type, and I'm just going to prefix each of these with an image slash, and then I'm going to go ahead and copy that in. So these are the allowed MIME types here. Now I'm going to have in the class, I'm going to have some details here. So I'm going to add the valid file extensions. So valid file extensions, and that's just all of the valid file extensions. So we could just say an array of those, and this is again going to be equal to these, and we can just control D the pipe operator and change it with a comma. Bring this down one, get the valid MIME types, so just plural here, get this valid MIME type, and copy in all of the allowed MIME types. And doing it this way allows you to, you know, just simply add some more types here, or in a type file if you separate it out, and then you don't have things all over the place. So what we want to do is we want to create where we want to pass in our form data. So let's go ahead and start to work on that. So we're passing in form data into our API call. So on that form data here, we can just go ahead and append for that file that we just created on the form group. You can pass for that file, you can pass the file we're getting in, and we're getting a file at this stage because it's made it past the no file check. So from here, this is where we want to actually check the file type. And you could just check the MIME type, and you could do that without a third-party package, but I've installed file type, so I can actually, if someone adds that, for example, that text file that's renamed to PNG, I can actually detect for that and then not even allow it to make the request. So I've set that up on the back end as well, but I'm going to do it on the front end as well, and then things are extra secure, so only the types that I want to allow in will get in. But for that, it uses this file type package here, and it's a very, very popular package, as you can see, 20 million weekly downloads. However, it isn't for Angular, it's a more general TypeScript sort of package, and I believe because Angular, it compiles the code down such that it can be used on older browsers and whatnot. The typing, some of the methods that are in this file type package don't easily translate over to those older browsers. So that means we need to add some polyfills, and polyfills is what you do when you need to support for older browsers. So if you open up the polyfills TypeScript file, we're going to go ahead and make a global type for us here. And we need the buffer type because we're going to use a method in our browser here relating to the buffer. By default, it's got this from stream and from blob, but elsewhere in the package they got the buffer, and you can see it implemented in Node. And this package does focus on the back end side of things, so you do have to tweak things a little bit in your single page applications. But essentially we want to use this from buffer, and there's a particular type of the buffer that we use, but if we use the one that's given to us in Angular, we'll get an error. So this is where we add our global type here. And firstly, we can just say window as any, just so there's no complaints about the type. And we can just say for the global variables, we'll just set that equal to the window. So that means the window.buffer is going to be equal to the window buffer, or we can require buffer.buffer. And notice how this errors. Well, we can just add some, we can just ignore that. So we can just add TS. Just ignore, it's like a linting rule, or just ignore the TypeScript, and just go ahead and ignore that. So make sure you do that if you want to be using this file type buffer in your application in Angular. Otherwise it won't work. So if we return to our profile summary, that means we want to call a method called array buffer. So on our file, we want to buffer it to an array, which turns it into a blob. Or it's a type of blob, an array buffer. Now this array buffer, this should be this is built in, but it's returning a promise. So we just want to make it an observable. So let's wrap that, and we can bring the from observable in. So what we'll do here is, before we get that back, we can just pipe into something here, and that means we're able to get the return buffer that it's returning for us. So we can use the switch map operator to return our own observable, and this is where the type buffer type comes in handy. So this is coming from the what we just set before, and we're going to need to bring switch map operator in from RxJS operators. Now this returns another, if we use this from buffer method, this is what's coming from the package. So file type has this from buffer method here, and we want to take that from file type /core. So make sure you get the right type there. So if we return back to our from buffer method, this doesn't happen instantly. So let's think about what's happening here. We're choosing a file, and from the file that we've chosen from our file system, it needs to convert the file, which is an image, which basically at its core you know, if you break it down to its core pieces, it's just a really long string, like a blob, and it's in a buffer. So a big long, but we got to convert the buffer into something that we can read. So what we want to do is call this from buffer method, and we can just pass in our buffer that we've got from the built-in array buffer. However, this is an asynchronous operation, so once again we want to wrap this in a from to convert it into an observable, and then we can pipe into this observable, and we can call the switch map operator, and what we're going to get back here, and this is built into the package, is something called a file type result, and this is of the type file type result, and we can bring that in. And if you want to have a look at what that is, essentially, well, we need to look at the next level in. It's essentially, it's just got an extension and a MIME type, and we've seen this before where you get an object back with the extension and with the MIME type, and what we want to do is check if it matches our extension or MIME type. So we can close those there. So what we'll do here is we'll say, well, what happens if we pass in that text file that says .png? Well, the type that it'll come back with is undefined. So since it doesn't recognize the type, it will be undefined. So we need to have a check here for that. So if there's no file type result, what we'll do, and it's only erroring because we're not returning something just yet, but that will go away. And I'm just going to do a console log here just for now. We'll come back to this when we do error handling, but I'm just going to have a message here saying I'm going to log out an error, and I'm going to say file format not supported. And we need to return something, so we'll just return an empty observable, and that will essentially do nothing. So if it makes it past this check, it means, you know, there was a file type. So we want to get the extension type and the MIME type. So we can use object destructuring to get that from the file type result. And we can have a method here saying, or a Boolean statement to see if the file type is legit. And we can tell because we've got our valid extensions, which is the array of valid file extensions. And if our file extension that we get back after it's made it through the file type method returns something that is in our valid file extensions, then it's legit. But if it doesn't, then it's not legit. So that extension type that we're getting back, now there's a conflict here because of types, because the extension you're getting back, it doesn't have to be a one that I've defined. You can get anything back really, or undefined. So I'm just going to go ahead, and since you can get anything back, it's okay if you just go ahead and say as any in this particular case. And we also want to do a similar thing, but for the MIME type. Now it may be a little bit of overkill to be checking both, but if you want things secure, you may as well. It's only an extra line of code. And we can say if the valid MIME types includes the MIME type that we get back after the file has been processed, and checks for its magic number, in which the package is able to tell through the buffering of the file whether or not the type is legit or not, or it matches that of what we've allowed in. That will help us determine if the file type and MIME type is legit. Now we want to have a overall Boolean value to see if the file is legit, and the Boolean is implied both through the name and through type inference. So this is just going to be true if both the file type and also the MIME type return true. If the file is not legit, this is where we're going to have another error handling case that we'll work on in another video. However, I might put a more serious error message here. File format does not match file extension. So we're protecting it on the front end, and it's also protected on the back end, so we wouldn't even expect to get a back end log. So we want to be keeping an eye out for if we do see the equivalent message on the back end side of things. That would be of concern. However, the security is set up so that that should not be happening. Okay, now if it makes it past all these checks, the file is legit, it's a valid file, it's the right type, we can go ahead and we can just go ahead and return from our Auth service, from the upload user image, we can pass in that form data that's going to be passed into our Auth service here, which makes the HTTP request with that file associated with it, and then we get back a modified file name if we need it, in which we do because we pipe into that and we tap into it, and then we set the next user and the user's modifier image path based on that modified file name that we get back. And then that, since we have an ability to get our requests, our images, we can use that path and return all of our images and propagate the changes throughout all of the subscriptions within our application. So that just means if you've done all this and you're not getting anything back, which can happen and it will happen, and that's just because we're not subscribing to the observable. So that should sort things out. Now, one last thing I'll do to finish off this method is I'll just go ahead and below this subscribe here, I'm just going to say this form.reset. Now, it's not super serious in this particular case because we have a image file and you literally need to click onto the file system and off it for you to even get into this method, and then the file will be attached to the form, but it just clears that from the form. And if you were to have some multi-form data, like you had some things that you typed in text and then the image as well, then it will just clear all that as well for you. So it's a nice touch to use that. And this is only erroring because we're not returning it. So we can just go ahead and return this observable here. You can save that. And with that, we've pretty much set up our user image upload functionality. Now, let's go ahead and try it out, although the changes won't happen yet because we haven't subscribed to them. But let's just go ahead and see if we can do that, and we'd expect to, in the back end, in our images, for something to happen. So click on this. I'm just going to get this nest image here. Now, did anything happen? Well, we can see that it did upload it to our server for us, so that's awesome. So And also I should probably look at the database here. There's nothing here in the user, but if we refresh this, we do get that file name in there. So that's awesome. So now what we need to do is subscribe to that, to the stream of user, and get the image throughout our application. And that's relatively easily from here. So let's just go to the top, and while we're doing this, we should probably do the full name as well. Now, I'm not going to make everything dynamic like the full stack developer and all that sort of things, just doing it so we know how to do it if we were to be doing this. So let's go ahead and just get that subscription that we're interested in. So what are we interested in? We're interested in the, let's see here, the full image path for the user. So we'll create a variable, user full image path. This is a string. Now we want to have a subscription because recall that we have access to our user stream, and we want to subscribe to this and detect any changes to the user subject and propagate that through our app. And we'll do this in the profile summary component to start things off. So the Auth Service, this is our source, our stream, our dynamic source of our user that can change, and we subscribe to it, and if it gets updated then it will be changed throughout. So what we'll do here is we'll have a private user subscription, which is of the type subscription. And the reason I do this is because I want to also be able to unsubscribe. So, and we'll see that in a moment. So if I go to the ng on a knit, we can go ahead and say, okay, this dot user subscription is equal to the Auth Service dot so this is where we want to get the user full image path. So if we look at that, we get this, that get method we made here, and this is going to either get us the default image or the full image path. So, and what we're expecting back is just the string that gives back. So this user subscription, this is going to be equal to that image path there. And we don't need to do a pipe one, take one here, because we're going to unsubscribe to this. So we get the full image path. That's going to be the string. We say this dot user full image path. We set the variable to the full image path. So as long as we're subscribed, it will constantly update the user full image path. So since it's doing that, what we want to do is we want to unsubscribe if we need to. So that means here we can have an on destroy, and we can bring that in, which is complaining because we do not have a ng on destroy lifecycle method, but we can very easily call that user subscription and unsubscribe from it. So all we really need to do now that we've subscribed to that is to change the source of the HTML such that rather than getting a hard-coded value, we can just go ahead and we can just say, well, if there is some sort of, what did we call it? User full image path. If that's there, we can go ahead and show an image, and that should always be there, because if it's not there, we'll show the you know, the other, the no image, the placeholder. But you know, just in case you deleted that file or something like that. So yeah. Okay, so we're gonna have to log in again. So I'll log into the user that has a image. And it's showing that it does not have an image. So what about if I choose this image again? Okay, so it's still showing that it's not having an image. So it is doing something, just not exactly what we wanted. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and put a console log in here, and I'm going to put in the full image path, but I also want to try out the username as well. So recall that we have the ability to get the user full name, and let's go ahead and do that. So let's do that below here. So we'll get a full name, and this is going to be an observable, and we'll set this to a new behavior subject so we can push changes to this, and we'll set that to be null, and then we'll also have a full name, and then we'll just set that equal to blank. So we'll bring this in, behavior, oh, there's no R, so we can bring this in and save that, and then we can go to our ng on a init, and before we do this user subscription here, we can say this.auth service, and then we can get our user full name. That's getting the user full name, and we can pipe into that. So we pipe into it, so we can use the take one. Try and use the take one where you call it rather than defined in the service, unless it's tricky not to do it. So it's good to remember where you're calling it, that you know, you're just taking one, and then you go ahead and you get the full name, which is going to be a string, and then you go ahead and you get back, then this is where you set this full name equal to full name, and this is where we can actively call the change to the full name. So the full name observable or subject, which is an observable that you can call the next method on, and then you can just pass in the full name here. And with that, we should be able to get the full name. Now obviously we're not changing our name, so we're changing the image, but if you were to have the ability to change your name, then where we subscribe to it there, it should change when you update the user. So one thing I'll note is that if I upload an image, I am not getting my console log, which means it's probably not making it to that section of the code. So I'm going to go ahead and find the bug. So the reason for the error is actually coming from the back end side of things. We were expecting an object with the modified file name to be coming back, but right now we're just getting an update result. So rather than getting an update result or an error, we would actually like to get our modified file name, because if the file name is not coming back for the location on the server, then it's not going to change on the front end to point towards that file. So let's just go ahead and get that. Now we're getting some errors going on here. This can be alleviated by just going into this switch map here and update user image by ID. Now we check if the file's legit on the back end as well. We get the user and then we update the user image by ID. So this is where we can actually pipe into this observable here, and we can just go ahead and we can map. So rather than getting our update result back, we can, and it doesn't really matter what we get there, but what we want to pass back is this object with the modified file name. So we can add this here, and because we've returned this object within the parentheses, this will just mean it'll return. And we want the file name that we're getting back from here. Go ahead and save that. And it's just complaining here because it's expecting an observable back. So rather than using map, let's just go ahead and use switch map. And let's go ahead and wrap this whole thing into an observable. And then now let's save that. So let's try and refresh our page. And let's try and upload something. And there we go. We see that that has been updated. And if we to refresh, we see that it's not persisting right now, but it's still letting us select the thing. So let's continue to work on the logic here. So what we've done here is when we open the profile summary component, this is where we actually call the subscription to subscribe to the user. And I've just console logged the full image path here as one, and you notice that we're getting this blank profile picture. Now that might seem a little confusing, and it isn't set up correctly just yet, because there is a actual image that we've uploaded and that's being set to the user. But the reason it's saying that it's not set is because we haven't updated the UI and model on the client. So basically nowhere in this application are we doing our first, and I can remove this now, but actually I'll leave it there just for now. But we're not actually getting the user image. So nowhere in this application have we hit the endpoint to get our user image in the first instance. So we want to get that user image, and actually we want to get the user image name so then we can put it into the HTML. So for that, and then we need to call it in a logical place, and because we're going to have an image in a few places, it doesn't really make sense for it to be in the profile summary component, although technically it will work, and but we should put it somewhere more it can be a source to the other places. So a good place to have that would be in the post service, because that's injected into the main section here, and then they'll cause the next to propagate for that user. So we need to get it in the first place basically, and be aware of that in our application. So if we open up the post service, let's see here, in home, in services, we got the post service here. So a good place to do this would be in the constructor. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just say we want to call this auth service, and of course we need to inject that so we have it. And one thing to note is the auth section is sort of going to be needed throughout the application, so it could be in a shared section. So it doesn't really matter if we're using it in all our modules. Right now we've only got this other, this post feed module, but it's all good. So this is of the type auth service. We'll bring this in, and you could put this in on a init, and typically you would, but I don't really need it for anything else, and I want this to happen at the beginning, so it doesn't really matter. But of course, if you have your preferences, you can do that. So there is the get user image name, so we want that. We want that to be running first, and we can just pipe into that, and that will allow us to just take one, because we only need it in the first instance when the page loads, and otherwise the image name is going to be updated as it is called here in our subscription here. And when we call the next user image name. So basically what we want to do here is we just want to tap into this, and we know that we're going to get the image name back, and we can use object destructuring to get the image name out of the object. And if there is an image name, and I'll bring in tab. If there is an image name, what we'll do here is we'll once again call the auth service, and then we'll call the update user image path, and we'll pass in the image name. So we want to we want to set it basically to the from the initial load, set it to the user, and we're subscribed to that, so it should be propagated to where we've subscribed to it. So we pass in the image name, and then we go ahead and we just subscribe to that. And because we have used the take one over here, we can just subscribe to that and not have to worry about any memory leaks. But if there is not an image name, this is where we would want to call our default image. So basically our default image and we can just use that method we made before, get and actually we might just pass in this bit here, so we'll do a little bit differently, and that's because the update user image path, it takes the image path in here like this, and then it sets it like that. So we don't want the full thing, we just want the name. So what we'll do here is we'll just say blank profile picture PNG, and we'll go ahead and we'll call this Auth Service. So then we're able to update the image path based on that default image path instead. And then we can go ahead and subscribe to that. And if you want, you could just, if you have a name, or you don't have a name, you set the path here and then you just have the one subscription. And in fact, let's just go ahead and do that, just make it slightly cleaner. So if there's no image name, actually it doesn't really matter that much. Actually I may as well, it's pretty easy to do. So basically what I want to do is I want to say if there's no image name, change this, and we have there's no need for an else anymore. We can just go ahead and put this in here like this, and we could have the image name or the default image path. Which actually means we don't even need this if check, because if it's not there, we'll just use the default image path. So let's go ahead and get rid of these lines here, and we've simplified our code a little bit here. Okay, so we've got the user image name and we're updating it. So now this isn't going to fire because we haven't subscribed to the outer observable, meaning everything inside it won't be working. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and subscribe. So let's see if that works. And you may have spotted that I have not used this get user image name. So we can go ahead and just pass in our image name here. Actually, sorry. Let's go ahead and log out our image name here. Just to make sure we're getting the right thing. And I'll just also log out A33 so we can find the comment or the log. So we can see that this actually isn't even firing. And I found the root of the problem. Before I changed this to a switch map because the map wasn't working. But the reason the map wasn't working is because I wasn't importing the map from RxJS. So this is in the user controller on the back end. Now that I'm mapping to the modified file name, I should finally be able to get the file name. So let's go here. Now let's return to where we've commented out in our post service. Now I was just doing some debugging here, but we can go ahead and we can remove this now, and we can bring back our method and we can save that. So with a little bit of debugging, I just found that this image name just had some slight typos in it, and basically what we want to do is it's very similar to the previous one. We go ahead and we just use the guard JWT. We get the en route image name, we give it a name, find user image name, and we pass in the request, but the reason why it wasn't working is it was waiting to give back a response, and that's where this res things was coming from, and that was holding things up. So basically, if I just get rid of this res here, I'll be able to get back my image that I have, and before it was just permanently hanging and I was just waiting for that request, and I can go ahead and get rid of this comment too. So with that, finally we're able to get our image as it is in our profile. So if I change this to this image, it gets changed, and if I refresh, then it stays there. So that's awesome. So we've finally got things working. Now I can return back to the code. I can close the back end up again, and I can go to the post service, and I can go ahead and delete my debugging work. And basically where we're at is this post service is going to run because it's injected into the main page, and that's a perfect time to start the core to get the initial user image, and we get the image, and if it's there, or we pass it in. If not, we give back a blank profile, so we can update the user to that blank profile picture, and then we go ahead and subscribe to both of those, and that will make our change stay here. So what I want to do next is I want to update all of the different areas. So this will be more or less the same sort of thing. So let's just take a look at the process that we have here. So in the profile summary component, this is where, and we can get rid of this debugging now. This is where we have our subscription to our user object, and we go ahead and we, for our user subscription, we define a variable for that subscription so we can unsubscribe to it when the component gets destroyed. So we're able to subscribe here, and I might even call this user image path subscription, not to get confused with the user subscription. So let's go ahead and change this to user image path subscription. It's a long name, but it's quite descriptive. And if I go ahead and change that there, and also in the onDestroy method. So let's begin to replicate this for the start post component and our other components. And we can see that we're going to need the name in here, and also in the two pop-ups and modals. The pop-over and the modal, we're going to need the name in addition to that, and we've set that up here. So this start post component, this is where we'll just copy the logic more or less. So I'll just do a Control P to open up the start post component. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to copy the user image full path and the subscription, and I'm going to define those variables at the top of the class. I'm going to bring in subscription from RxJS, and I'm going to go to the ng on init. I'm also going to implement onDestroy so I can unsubscribe, so I'm not getting any memory leaks. So I can just go to the ng on init. I can copy over the user image path subscription here into our, and I'm going to need the Auth Service, so I'll get that in as well. So the user image path subscription is equal to the Auth Service and subscribing to that event as before. And then we're just going to need the other lifecycle method to get the ng onDestroy. And then we can just simply call this user subscription, and we can unsubscribe. So all we need to do is show these changes in our template. So for our iron image, we can just say if we have a user full image path, we can go ahead and use that, and then we can bind that to that path. And now if we take a look, okay, if I change this to a different logo, we see that it changes here as well. So we're doing well, and if I refresh, the change will stay. So let's just keep going. We'll do the same thing in the modal component. So let's bring that up. And we'll also get up the template. So we'll just copy those over, bring it into the modal. We'll get our Auth Service. We'll bring in the subscription. And we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. Get the ng on destroy as well. So we're able to implement the on destroy interface. And of course we can do the logic in the ng on init. And we can copy the same thing over to this image over here too. So we'll look for the iron image, and we can just go ahead and we can place this here like this, and we can get rid of this. And I just realized we may actually want this on the avatar, although an empty avatar doesn't really matter, so we'll just keep going like this. And we see it there. So we're nearly done. We've just got 2 more to do. So let's open up the header and the HTML. Exact same steps. Copy this over. Find the variables at the top here, bring in the subscription, implement the on destroy, lifecycle method, go to the end of the file with a control end, put it at the end, call on destroy, auto import that. Do this in the ng on init, and you can see how we're subscribing in all these places to a source. So if the source changes, then all of the places where it's subscribed to changes, and that's quite helpful, especially if we change up the logic. We don't have to change it in multiple places or anything like that. So we'll just bring in that Auth Service there. And we'll just copy this thing here again, get the image, we'll search for the iron image. Okay, I'm not seeing an image for some reason. Oh, iron.img. Get this, bind it, so we see it there, and now finally we just need the profile image to be changed for the popover. So we'll get that, and that's in the popover component. So let's go ahead and we'll just say Okay, so the popover component, we'll copy over we'll get the Auth Service to the popover component, and just ignore those errors there. Oh, we already got it. So we'll go ahead and get those variables in there. So let's get those. Bring in subscription. Get the on destroy. Unsubscribe. Subscribe where necessary in the ng on init. And we see we'll do this here. Now what we can do is we can say ng on the init, we'll get the full image path, we'll bind that to the iron image, and we'll place that here. So we'll save that. Okay, we're getting some sort of weird error here. So we'll just go ahead and remove the ng if. Save that. And there we go. And if we were to choose another image, let's say this one, we can see that that change has propagated all throughout our code base. So I just need to change this name here as well. Now currently it looks the same, but it's just hard coded at the moment, so I might go ahead and do that. So how I'll do that is I will go back to my profile summary, because that's where I've done another full name for that profile summary component. So I can actually just go ahead and I can just copy these in, copy these over to the popover component. I'm not sure why it's erroring right now, but I'll deal with that in another video, in the error handling or something like that. Still want to, this video is quite long and I want to stay focused on the image upload. So I'm just going to go here